Beneath the vastness of uncharted space, where stars shimmered like distant campfires in the void, the colony of Yvonne Prime thrived, a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. The planet, with its amber skies and sprawling crystalline forests, had been a jewel of the expansion efforts. Its settlers had carved out a life amidst the alien beauty, forging cities that blended seamlessly with the natural wonders around them. On this quiet evening, the colony basked in peace, oblivious to the storm about to descend. Inside the Orbital Defense Headquarters, Lieutenant Commander Eliza Merrick leaned over a holographic display of the system's sensor grid, sipping a lukewarm cup of synthetic coffee. Her expression bore the telltale signs of boredom, her fingers absently tapping the table as the grid showed no anomalies. Patrols were routine, and Yvonne Prime hadn't seen an intrusion in decades. "Anything exciting on your end, Vern?" she called over to her colleague, Ensign Vern Sato, who sat at a neighboring station, spinning lazily in his chair. "Define exciting," Vern replied, his voice tinged with fatigue. "Another herd of crystal grazers crossing the southern perimeter? Maybe a meteor shower?" Eliza smirked. "Don't tempt fate. The moment you complain, Murphy's Law kicks in." As if summoned by her words, an alarm blared, cutting through the idle chatter of the control room. Red lights flashed, and the holographic display erupted in a cascade of warnings. Eliza bolted upright, her coffee forgotten as it toppled to the floor. "Unidentified vessels entering the system," Vern reported, his voice sharp now. His fingers danced across his console, pulling up data. 17 ships, large signatures. "They're not broadcasting identification codes. Pirates don't travel in fleets that size," Eliza muttered, her heart pounding. "Get me a visual." The central screen displayed the incoming vessels, sleek and angular, their hulls shimmering with an iridescent sheen. The design was nothing like the utilitarian craft of humanity's allied species. Eliza's gut twisted. Whoever they weren't here for a friendly visit. "Sound the alert," she ordered. "Evacuate civilians to the bunkers and scramble the orbital defenses. We're about to have company." Far from Yvonne Prime's skies, a council of war unfolded aboard the flagship of the Ktharn Dominion. The Ktharn, a reptilian race with scaled bodies and eyes that glowed with a predatory intensity, were not known for subtlety. Their leader, High Warlord Escarol, loomed over a tactical display, his claws tapping impatiently against the table. "These humans," Escarol hissed, his voice reverberating through the chamber, "have spread too far, too fast. Their colonies encroach upon what should be ours." A subordinate nodded, his scales catching the light of the display. "Their defenses are primitive. A single strike will break their spirit and remind them of their place. Then let us show them the wrath of the Dominion," Escarol declared, baring his jagged teeth. "Yvonne Prime will be the first to burn." As the alien fleet descended, chaos erupted across the colony. Civilians rushed to shelters, their faces etched with terror as sirens blared. The Planetary Defense Network came online, automated turrets swiveling to track the incoming ships. Eliza stood at the center of the command room, issuing orders with rapid precision. "Target the lead vessels and fire at will," she commanded. "Keep the civilians covered." The defense platforms unleashed a torrent of missiles and energy blasts, streaking toward the invaders. The alien ships responded with terrifying precision, their weapon systems slicing through the planetary defenses like a blade through silk. Explosions lit up the sky, and Eliza felt the floor tremble beneath her feet. "Shields on platforms 2 and 3 are down," Vern reported, his voice strained. "We're losing ground fast." Eliza clenched her fists. This wasn't just an attack, it was a massacre. And yet, as the first buildings crumbled under the onslaught, a strange phenomenon began to unfold. It started as a tremor beneath the planet's surface, subtle but growing in intensity. Across the crystalline forests, the ground shimmered with an ethereal glow, as though the world itself were waking. Then, with a sound like thunder amplified 1,000-fold, the ground split open. From the fissures emerged creatures of legend, massive, serpentine beings with scales that shimmered like molten metal. Their eyes burned with an ancient fire, and their wings spread wide, casting shadows over the battlefield. Dragons. Not mythical constructs of Earth's history, but real, living titans of Yvonne Prime. High Warlord SK watched the unfolding spectacle from his flagship, his confident smirk faltering. "What is this?" he snarled, gesturing to the display. The tactical officer's scales dulled in fear. Unknown life forms, Warlord. They were not detected before the attack. SK's eyes narrowed. Deal with them. The alien fleet redirected its firepower, unleashing a barrage upon the dragons. But the creatures were not so easily subdued. They weaved through the onslaught with impossible agility, their scales deflecting energy blasts. One dragon inhaled deeply, and when it exhaled, a torrent of plasma engulfed an enemy vessel, reducing it to molten wreckage. Back on the surface, Eliza and her team watched in awe as the dragons joined the fray. The creatures weren't attacking the colony, they were targeting the invaders. "Did anyone know we had those?" Vern asked, his voice a mix of terror and wonder. "No," Eliza replied, shaking her head. "But I'm not about to question a miracle." She grabbed the comms. "All units, focus fire on any ships the dragons aren't targeting. Let's give them some backup." The battle raged on, the skies above Yvonne Prime a chaotic tapestry of fire and fury. The Ktharn fleet, so confident in its superiority, found itself outmatched not by technology, but by the primal fury of the dragons. As the tide began to turn, the invaders grew desperate. SK himself descended to the planet's surface, determined to salvage his campaign. Eliza was in the thick of it, coordinating ground forces to protect the colony from stray attacks. When SK's personal dropship landed near the command center, she knew this confrontation would be inevitable. She grabbed her sidearm and stepped outside, facing the towering reptilian warlord. "You think your beasts can save you, human?" SK growled, his voice dripping with contempt. "The Dominion will not be denied." Eliza leveled her weapon at him. "You made a mistake coming here. We don't take kindly to invaders." SK lunged, his claws striking with blinding speed. Eliza dodged, firing a volley of shots that struck his armor but failed to penetrate. She retreated, drawing him into the open where one of the dragons circled overhead. As SK prepared to strike again, a deafening roar shook the ground. The dragon descended, its eyes locking onto the warlord. SK hesitated, his bravado faltering as the creature loomed over him. In that moment, Eliza saw her chance. "Hey, scales for brains," she called out, pointing to the dragon. "You just woke the dragons. Congratulations." The dragon's maw opened, and a torrent of plasma consumed SK. When the light faded, nothing remained of the warlord but scorched earth. The battle ended with the alien fleet retreating, their confidence shattered. The dragons, as if satisfied with their victory, returned to the fissures from which they had emerged. Yvonne Prime was scarred but not broken. In the aftermath, Eliza stood at the edge of one of the fissures, staring into the glowing depths. The dragons had saved them, but the mystery of their existence remained. "Think they'll come back if we need them?" Vern asked, joining her. Eliza smiled faintly. "Let's hope we never have to find out." As the colony began to rebuild, a new legend was born, of humans and dragons, united against those who would dare to challenge their home. The aftermath of the Ktharn invasion left Yvonne Prime battered but unbroken. Smoke still curled from the charred remains of destroyed structures, and the air held the acrid tang of burnt metal and ozone. The colony's defense forces worked tirelessly to secure critical infrastructure, but the scars of the attack ran deeper than physical damage. Fear lingered in the hearts of the settlers, and whispers of the dragons spread like wildfire through the population. In the Central Command bunker, Lieutenant Commander Eliza Merrick stared at the holographic display detailing the colony's current status. Power grids were stabilizing, emergency medical facilities were overwhelmed but operational, and food supplies were holding steady for now. The most pressing concern, however, was the question gnawing at her mind. Would the Ktharn come back? "We need answers," she muttered to herself, rubbing the fatigue from her eyes. And fast. Varun Sato entered the room, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced with a grim expression. "Got something you need to see?" he said, holding up a data tablet. "Scans from deep geological surveys. You're gonna love this." Eliza took the tablet and frowned as she reviewed the data. Deep beneath the surface, seismic activity had spiked in the wake of the dragon's appearance. Strange energy signatures pulsed from the fissures, fluctuating in a pattern eerily similar to biosignals. "They're not just sleeping," Eliza whispered. "They're communicating." In the days following the battle, a reconnaissance team was dispatched to investigate the fissures. Equipped with environmental suits and armed with high-powered scanners, they descended cautiously into the glowing depths. The crystalline walls pulsed with a steady rhythm, a low hum resonating through the cavernous tunnels. Dr. Callum Reyes, the colony's leading xenobiologist, knelt beside an enormous scale embedded in the rock. Its surface shimmered with colors beyond the visible spectrum, reacting to his touch with a faint vibration. "This isn't natural," he murmured into his comms. This is a symbiotic relationship between the planet and the dragons." Eliza's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Explain." "These creatures aren't just native wildlife," Reyes replied. "They're part of the ecosystem in ways we never imagined. The planet provides them with sustenance, and in return, they serve as its protectors." He paused, standing up and brushing dust off his gloves. "We may have only seen a fraction of their capabilities." A sudden tremor rippled through the ground, and the team exchanged nervous glances. From deeper within the tunnels, a deep rumble echoed. Something was stirring. "We should move," Reyes said, his voice tight with unease. The team hurried back to the surface, but as they emerged, a sight greeted them that made their blood run cold. High in the atmosphere, a familiar formation of sleek, iridescent vessels hovered just beyond the planet's orbital defenses. The Ktharn had returned. Eliza barely had time to process the incoming threat before alarms blared across the colony. This time, the Ktharn weren't alone. A larger fleet loomed on the periphery, their hulking warships bristling with weapons far more advanced than the first wave. "They brought reinforcements," Vern muttered, his hands flying over his console. "Looks like they weren't too happy about getting roasted." Eliza grimaced. "We can't hold them off alone. We need to wake the dragons again." Dr. Reyes appeared on the main screen, his face lined with urgency. "We might not have to. I believe the dragons are already aware of the threat. The energy signatures are spiking. They're preparing." "Preparing?" Eliza asked sharply. "For what?" Reyes swallowed. "For war." Eliza turned to her tactical officer. "Get every remaining defense turret online and divert power to the shield generators. We buy as much time as we can until our friends wake up." The colony's anti-orbital cannons roared to life, sending volleys of plasma and missile fire into the invading fleet. The Ktharn ships responded in kind, and the skies above Evon Prime turned into a blazing battlefield. Explosions lit up the heavens as both sides exchanged relentless fire, but the colony's defenses were not designed for sustained conflict against an armada of this scale. Suddenly, the ground trembled violently, and a deafening roar echoed across the landscape. From the fissures, the dragons emerged once more, their shimmering scales glowing with an inner fire. They soared into the sky with breathtaking speed, weaving through enemy fire with predatory grace. One dragon, larger than the others, let out a piercing shriek that reverberated through the atmosphere. Its eyes burned like twin suns, and with a single powerful beat of its wings, it ascended toward the flagship of the Ktharn fleet. Inside the command center, Eliza watched in awe. "They're not just fighting," she whispered. "They're leading." The largest dragon unleashed a stream of plasma that slammed into the enemy flagship shields, causing them to ripple and collapse. Within seconds, the dragon's claws tore through the vessel's hull like paper, sending debris scattering into the void. The Ktharn forces scrambled to adjust, deploying swarms of fighter craft in a desperate attempt to contain the dragons, but the creatures were relentless. As they engaged the enemy, Eliza saw a pattern emerging, a tactical, coordinated assault that suggested intelligence far beyond mere instinct. "They're not just protectors," Varun said in amazement. "They're warriors." Despite the dragon's intervention, the battle raged fiercely. The Ktharn, realizing they were being overwhelmed, resorted to a desperate measure. On the colony's outskirts, a massive shockwave erupted as an orbital drop pod smashed into the ground. From within, towering Ktharn war machines emerged, bipedal titans bristling with heavy weaponry. "They're deploying ground forces," Eliza shouted, grabbing her rifle. "All units, fall back to defensive positions." Colonial Marines engaged the invading mechs in a brutal firefight, but their weapons were barely enough to dent the towering constructs. As Eliza ducked behind cover, a dragon descended from the sky, landing with earth-shaking force. Its claws swiped through one of the Ktharn machines, ripping it apart with terrifying ease. One of the creatures turned toward Eliza, its glowing eyes locking onto her for a brief moment before it turned back to the enemy. It wasn't just protecting the colony, it was acknowledging her. With renewed determination, she rallied her troops. "We fight alongside them," she shouted. "Push the invaders back." The battle on the ground became a desperate clash of steel, fire, and determination. Dragons swept across the battlefield, incinerating enemy forces, while the colonists fought with everything they had. Eliza found herself firing alongside a dragon, their combined efforts turning the tide against the Ktharn war machines. As the battle wore on, it became clear that the Ktharn were facing not only a military defeat, but a psychological one. Their fear of the dragons grew with every passing moment. Ships began to retreat, and ground forces faltered under the relentless assault. Escarol, watching the chaos unfold from his flagship, clenched his fists in fury. "These humans, they are more dangerous than we believed," he growled. And then, with an earth-shaking bellow, the largest dragon landed atop the last remaining Ktharn mech, crushing it underfoot. It spread its wings wide, sending a clear message across the battlefield. This planet was under their protection. As the Ktharn fleet began to withdraw, Eliza exhaled a long breath. The colony had survived again. But as she looked at the dragons soaring above, she knew this was only the beginning of a much larger battle to come. The charred remains of Ktharn war machines littered the outskirts of Evon Prime, their hulking forms twisted and broken, while the skies above the colony burned with the dying embers of fallen starships. The dragons had driven the invaders back, but Eliza Merrick knew the reprieve was temporary. The Ktharn were a proud and vengeful species. They wouldn't take this defeat lightly. Inside the command bunker, the air was thick with tension. Varun paced back and forth, his usual humor replaced with an anxious frown. "I've intercepted Ktharn transmissions," he said, eyes scanning the data on his screen. "They're regrouping outside the system." This wasn't a full-scale assault, just a probing strike. Eliza leaned over his shoulder, her face tight with worry. "So they were testing us." Varun nodded. "And now they know exactly what they're up against. They won't make the same mistakes twice." Dr. Callum Reyes, standing nearby, pushed up his glasses and cleared his throat. "There's another problem. The dragons. They're changing." Eliza turned to him sharply. "What do you mean?" He pulled up a holographic projection of the energy readings they'd been monitoring. "Their energy signatures have shifted dramatically since the battle. It's as if the conflict triggered something within them, an adaptation process." He hesitated. "I believe they're evolving." "Evolving?" Eliza echoed, incredulous. "You're saying they're getting stronger?" Reyes nodded solemnly. "Yes. And not just physically. Their neural activity is off the charts. They're learning at an unprecedented rate." He pointed to a particular waveform. "If my calculations are correct, they may even be developing some form of telepathic communication." Eliza took a deep breath. "So, you're telling me we might be sharing this planet with a species that's not just intelligent, but potentially more advanced than we are?" Reyes gave a reluctant nod. "And if the Ktharn realize that, they'll stop at nothing to claim Evon Prime." The first signs of the Ktharn's renewed assault came days later. The colony's long-range sensors detected the incoming fleet, 3 times larger than before. Heavy battleships, troop carriers, and siege dreadnoughts loomed on the horizon, their silhouettes blotting out the stars. It was an armada designed for one purpose: annihilation. Eliza stood in the command center, watching the tactical display with a sinking feeling in her gut. The colony's defenses, battered and barely holding together, wouldn't withstand an all-out siege. Even with the dragons, they were facing impossible odds. A message came through the comms, a guttural voice that sent chills down her spine. "Humans of Yvonne Prime," it snarled. "You have meddled in affairs beyond your understanding. Surrender the planet and the creatures you so foolishly call allies, or face total destruction." Eliza narrowed her eyes. "Put me through," she said, stepping forward. When the link opened, she faced the screen with unwavering resolve. "This colony belongs to us, and so do the dragons. If you want either, come and get them." The Ctharn warlord on the other end, a towering figure with scarred scales and piercing yellow eyes, let out a deep, menacing laugh. "So be it, human. Your ashes will serve as a reminder to others who dare challenge the Dominion." The transmission cut, and the countdown to war began. The colony braced for impact. Every able-bodied colonist was armed and ready, makeshift barricades erected across the city streets. The defense platforms hummed with renewed energy, their operators scanning the skies nervously. And above it all, the dragons circled like silent sentinels, their glowing eyes watching, waiting. Eliza stood on the observation deck, gripping the railing as the first wave of enemy fighters descended. "Here we go," she muttered under her breath. The Ctharn assault came swift and merciless. Dropships breached the colony's atmosphere, releasing waves of heavily armored infantry onto the surface. Explosions rocked the city as kinetic bombardments rained down, leveling entire sections in moments. Colonial Marines engaged the enemy on all fronts, but they were outnumbered 10-1. Then the dragon struck. A massive, bronze-scaled beast swept down from the skies, its talons ripping through Ctharn walkers with devastating precision. Another unleashed a torrent of plasma breath that turned an entire enemy battalion into molten slag. They fought with a calculated ferocity that left even the most hardened Marines in awe. Eliza led a squad through the wreckage of the Eastern District, moving with practiced efficiency. She ducked behind a crumbling wall as a Ctharn soldier opened fire, returning shots with deadly accuracy. "Push forward," she commanded, motioning for her troops to advance. Suddenly, a roar split the air, and a shadow passed over them. One of the larger dragons landed nearby, its scales glowing like molten gold. It stared at Eliza for a moment, then lowered its head. "Is it waiting for something?" Varun asked, panting beside her. Eliza's mind raced. Then, a crazy thought struck her. She climbed onto the dragon's back, gripping the ridges along its spine. As if understanding, the dragon took off, soaring into the sky with Eliza clinging for dear life. From above, the battlefield looked like a chaotic mosaic of destruction. She could see the enemy command center near the outskirts of the colony, a towering, spire-like structure pulsing with energy. "Take us there," she whispered, and to her amazement, the dragon banked toward it. The flight was a blur of wind and fire. As they approached the Ctharn command post, Eliza unholstered her rifle, lining up shots as the dragon dove, strafing the enemy lines with its breath. Explosions erupted below as Ctharn forces scrambled to respond. Inside the command center, Esquirol watched in stunned disbelief as the dragon and its human rider tore through his ranks. "Impossible," he hissed, his claws tightening around the control panel. "They fight as one." The battle raged for hours, but the tide was shifting. With the dragons and colonists working in perfect synchronization, the Ctharn forces began to falter. Their war machines crumbled under the relentless assault, their commanders growing desperate. Eliza landed the dragon outside the command center, dismounting with a newfound confidence. She entered the structure, rifle at the ready, and found Esquirol waiting. "You have lost," she said simply. Esquirol's eyes burned with fury. "You think this is over? We will return, and we will burn this world to the ground." Eliza stepped closer, her expression hard.
No.
You won't. She gestured to the dragons circling above. Because you didn't just attack us. You attacked them. And I don't think they'll be so forgiving next time. SK Rawl hesitated, the realization settling in. With a final snarl, he activated a recall beacon, and within moments, the remaining Ktharn forces began their retreat. As their ships vanished into the void, Eliza exhaled a long breath, exhaustion threatening to overtake her. But she couldn't stop now. There was still work to be done. She turned to Varun, who stood beside her, grinning. So, he said, how does it feel to ride a dragon? Eliza chuckled, brushing dust off her uniform. Let's just say, I think I've found my new favorite form of transportation. The silence that followed the Ktharn retreat was almost as deafening as the battle itself. Smoke curled from the ruins of Yvonne Prime, the once thriving colony now scarred with the wounds of war. Yet despite the devastation, hope lingered in the air, a fragile ember ignited by an unlikely alliance between humanity and the dragons. Eliza Merrick stood atop a crumbling balcony overlooking the central plaza, where colonists worked tirelessly to clear debris and tend to the wounded. The dragons, their iridescent scales shimmering under the planet's twin suns, watched from the outskirts, their massive forms coiled around the crystalline fissures from which they had emerged. The bond between them and humanity had been forged in fire and blood, but questions still remained. Varun approached, a tablet tucked under his arm, his face streaked with soot and exhaustion. Well, he said, exhaling heavily.
We survived.
Again. Eliza smirked, though the weight of responsibility bore heavily on her shoulders. Barely. How's the status report? Critical systems are coming back online, Varun replied. Food and water supplies are stable, but we've got a long way to go before things are normal. If normal even exists anymore. Eliza nodded, her gaze drifting to the distant horizon where a dragon perched atop a jagged spire, its golden eyes fixed on the colony. And the dragons? Varun hesitated. Still here. But they're different. He tapped his tablet, pulling up scans of their energy signatures. Reyes wasn't kidding. Their neural activity is spiking beyond anything we've seen. They're adapting faster than we can measure. Eliza turned to him. What do you think it means? Varun gave a half-hearted shrug. Either they see us as allies, or we're just another problem they need to solve. Before Eliza could respond, Reyes's voice crackled through the comms. Commander, you need to see this. Get to the fissure, now. The fissure where the dragons had first emerged pulsed with an eerie glow, the crystalline formations shimmering with unknown energy. Dr. Reyes stood at the edge, his face pale as he analyzed the readings. It's accelerating, he said, his voice hushed. The entire planet's biosphere is shifting. Eliza narrowed her eyes. Shifting how? Reyes turned to her, anxiety clear in his expression. I think the dragons are preparing for something much bigger. Their energy signatures are synchronizing with the planet itself. It's almost as if they're waking it up. Eliza frowned. You're telling me the planet is alive? Reyes hesitated. Not in the way we understand life. But it's interconnected in ways we've never seen before. The dragons might be its guardians, but they're also part of something much older, much deeper. Before Eliza could fully process the implications, the ground trembled beneath their feet. The dragons lifted their heads in unison, their eyes glowing with a collective intelligence that sent shivers down her spine. Then, for the first time, a voice echoed, not through the air, but through their minds. We are the keepers. You have awakened us. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. The voice wasn't one, but many, layered, ancient, and resonant. The dragons weren't just creatures. They were the consciousness of the planet itself. Varun stared wide-eyed. Did anyone else hear that? Eliza steadied herself, her heart pounding. Loud and clear. She took a cautious step forward, addressing the towering form of the largest dragon. What do you mean, awakened? What are you? The dragon's gaze pierced through her, and the voice spoke again. You are not the first to come here. Others sought to control us. They failed. You are different. You seek to protect. Eliza exchanged a look with Reyes and Varun. The Ktharn, she murmured. They've been here before. They will return, the voice continued. In greater numbers. The cycle repeats. It is inevitable. Eliza clenched her fists. Not this time. We'll fight to protect this planet. The dragon tilted its head slightly, as if considering her words. To fight is to survive. But to survive is to understand. We will teach you if you are willing. Eliza's throat tightened. She had never imagined this moment, not just an alliance of necessity, but the possibility of something far greater. And if we refuse? The dragon's eyes darkened. Then you will perish as those before you. Varen coughed awkwardly. Well, I vote for learning. Eliza exhaled slowly. We're willing. Teach us. In the weeks that followed, the relationship between humans and dragons evolved into something unprecedented. The colony rebuilt, stronger than before, with the dragons assisting in ways they could barely comprehend. They weren't just beasts of war. They were architects, engineers, and wisdom keepers of an age long forgotten. Through telepathic connection, the colonists began to understand the deeper nature of Evon Prime. The planet's crystalline network acted as a vast neural web, and the dragons were its caretakers, its protectors. Knowledge poured into human minds, ancient strategies, ecological balance, and even new forms of energy manipulation that far surpassed anything humanity had developed. Eliza found herself forming an unspoken bond with the largest dragon, whom the colonists had begun to call Vera. Riding her through the skies, Eliza could feel the pulse of the planet beneath her feet, a connection that defied explanation. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about unity. But beneath the surface, Eliza couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. The Ktharn would return, and next time, they wouldn't just come with brute force. They would come with the knowledge of what they had lost. One evening, as Eliza stood atop the colony's tallest spire, Vera landed beside her. You fear what is to come, the dragon's voice echoed in her mind. Eliza nodded. They won't stop until they own this planet. Vera's eyes gleamed with a knowing light. Then we will show them why it belongs to no one. The Ktharn returned 6 months later, their fleet stretching across the sky like a storm. But this time, the colonists were ready, not just with weapons but with knowledge. Dragons and humans stood together, united in purpose. As the Ktharn ships descended, they were met with a force unlike anything they had ever encountered. Energy surged through the crystalline forests, guided by human ingenuity and dragon power, forming barriers that absorbed and redirected their attacks. Eliza led the charge, riding Vera into the heart of battle. The skies ignited with plasma fire and dragon flame, but the colony held strong. The Ktharn fought desperately, but it was clear they were facing something beyond their comprehension. And then, with a final, resonant roar, the dragons unleashed a pulse across the planet, a coordinated surge of energy that sent the Ktharn fleet tumbling out of the sky, their systems overloaded by the sheer force of planetary will. As the last enemy vessel fled into the darkness of space, Eliza felt something stir deep within her. Humanity hadn't just survived, they had become something more. She looked to the horizon, where the dragons soared in triumphant arcs across the sky. A smile tugged at her lips. Evon Prime was no longer just a colony. It was home.